So there's a corporate, media, and politician nexus there,
Right.
which is very disturbing. So in this case, none of the top journalists accepted that they had even made any errors of judgment. They refused to accept that. One of them resigned under protest, saying, I haven't done anything, but the others are all still in place. At the end of last year, we have a new chairman of the Press Council of India, who's been creating a lot of noise and exerting this pressure. So you had the Election Commission, now you have the Press Council chairman, who's been making a lot of noise about media standards. Then earlier this year, the judiciary got into the act, entirely different. So you have these different players who are coming in to exert pressure on the media that the government is unable to do. The judiciary got into the act by saying that we need to have guidelines for reporting court proceedings, that they're not being done in the right manner, which I think there is some validity to that. And there's again the whole defense from the media that this is entirely inappropriate, attack on the freedom of the press, attack on the right of people to know, etc. The judiciary also, a former Chief Justice filed a defamation case against one of the news channels, and the High Court awarded him damages of 1 billion rupees, which is about 12 million pounds. 12 million pounds, huge amount of money. So this news channel went to the Supreme Court in appeal. The Supreme Court said, yes, no problem, we'll talk about it. Please deposit 20% of the money in cash and 80% as a bank guarantee, and then we'll talk about it. So the judiciary, the Election Commission of India, various other statutory bodies have been exerting pressure from different directions on the press. Mm-hmm. And it's clear to everybody inside the media, all my friends who I talk to, that there are serious problems. But it's just that the whole culture of competition and proprietor pressure, owner pressure, and directions is become very difficult to change, and everybody is stuck in that culture. But there are several inputs coming in from different directions, which might fructify into something.
Okay, great. I was going to say, it makes us look pretty clean by comparison, really, doesn't it?
I mean, I would just throw in that our Mayor of London is paid
who's coming this evening,
£140,000 a year by the people of London to act in their interests. He's paid, last time I looked, £250,000 a year to act in the interests of the owner of the Daily Telegraph, who is, the owners of the Daily Telegraph, who live in tax exile in the Channel Islands. Nobody seems to find this objectionable. As I say, there's a certain Berlusconiization has gone on here, with, normalising things that shouldn't be normal.
Sorry, I'm going to pick up on that. Is it the amounts of money involved? I mean, the local MP who writes for his newspaper or writes paid articles for newspapers, is that your problem with it, or is it this disparity between his professional income and his mayoral income and his writing income that upsets you?
Well, I think it shouldn't be happening.
Okay.
I mean, I just think whose interests does this man represent? Right. I mean, it just seems to me a problem. Do the interests of the residents of London always coincide with those of the Daily Telegraph? I find that hard to believe.
Okay.
I've been sort of had this slightly pent up, but the question of LEVESON making a difference, and you raised, told this story of how there've been repeated investigations into the press in Australia, and really nothing much changes. And lots of your stories have direct echoes with the history here, as you probably know. I was always very struck, and in fact it was in my mind because I was boring somebody with it over lunch, something that James Curran said to me, which was, and he was, if I'm right, obviously a very young man, on the Secretariat of the Third Royal Commission into the Press in the 70s. And he said two things. One was that in that case, there was no civil society engagement. This was something that took place entirely between lawyers, politicians, and journalists, particularly editors and proprietors. So it was in the bubble, as it were, an entirely Beltway event. And the other thing was that it was entirely mediated to the public by the press. And I mean, in that context, I used to carry around with me a photocopy of the front page of the Daily Mail on the day after the first Royal Commission had reported in 1949. And that is a complex document with lots of interesting things in it, but it insisted on the creation of a press council, which had not previously existed. But the headline in the Daily Mail was, "The press vindicated." And you may imagine that if the press alone was mediating what we were seeing at what we're seeing at Leveson, it would make no difference, because you would be reading what you read in the Daily Mail today, which is that and they have a sort of Panglossian tale to tell of Michael Gove standing up for freedom of expression, and we get that. It is persistent, but that is no longer the only mediation. There are lots of other ways that people are finding out about what's going on. It is very widely talked about. It has a certain compelling quality. It's also the case that the PCC is gone. There is a sort of tabula rasa now. Nobody accepts that the old regime is defensible, except Christopher Mayer. That's the only person left. And that is, that's fine. He can go into his corner and, amuse himself with that, but nobody else accepts it. And so, it will, whatever happens, make a difference, and a big difference. And there is the opportunity, because of the level of public awareness, and that it will be different. And Leveson himself keeps saying this. I'm not going to be another volume on the shelf beside the story of Cathcart, beside the third, second, and first Royal Commission. I'm not going to be that. I'm going to produce something that makes a difference.
But it's a function of the way the press has intervened in the lives of the Sienna Millers and Steve Coogans that's attracted the public attention into the whole Leveson inquiry, isn't it? Because people like that have actually been asked to give evidence that's been widely reported.
Yes, I mean, you say that. It certainly helps. And I mean, I have stories I could tell you about, the press wanting to, well, I mean, it's a simple thing, hacked off. And it always happens with Newsnight and with Today programme, the big agenda setters, they come to us and they say, we want somebody from Hacked Off. And you say, well, Brian Cathcart's available, Martin Moore's available, Evan Harris is available. So can we have Hugh Grant? And so they said, well, he doesn't want to overdo that, and blah 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 blah. And they said, no, we really want Hugh Grant. And then so we eventually, we put it to Hugh, and sometimes he says yes, and he goes on the programme. The first question they ask him, they say contemptuously, "Isn't this just all about celebrities whinging?" And it's a perfect circle. And I mean, I pick on Newsnight and Today because that's what happens. That is exactly what happens. We've had better play elsewhere, and I make no complaints elsewhere, really. But the celebrity thing only works so far, because you have to remember that in all of the months, I think we have an expert here, in all of the months in which we went from the Guardian's exposure of the Furneville email in July 2009 to the Millie Dowler revelation of July 2011, Sienna Miller was fighting a court case against this is the woman against News International. This is a woman who, if she changed her hat, would have coverage in the tabloids. But somehow they never got to mention the fact that she was suing News International for hacking her phones and the phones of 15 or 20 people in her immediate circle.
Right. It was about
so celebrity only goes so far.
Right, okay.
When they don't want to talk about a celebrity, they cannot talk about a celebrity.
I think we're coming to the end. Are there any questions that the floor would like to ask? Judith? Could you just wait for the mic? Sorry. Thank you.
Hello. It was really interesting to hear about the selective reporting of the media industry in India and Australia as well, and I just wondered, sort of bringing that back to Brian's point just then about civil society and about penetration by digital media into those mainstream brands, and whether that's had much influence in changing media agenda or bringing things to light. I was just thinking in Australia, for example, I know you've got Crikey and Mumbrella are quite robust, extra voices.
Crikey.com and Matilda.com too, which is independent news magazine. And interestingly enough, Crikey which is privately owned by a man called Eric Beecher, who's a publisher, has just agreed to join the Press Council, which is, I find interesting. And Crikey was one of the few outlets, really almost including the ABC, although the ABC did a reasonably good job, especially on its equivalent to BBC Radio 4, Radio National, which has a lot of in-depth current affairs analysis on it. Crikey and Matilda, and as I say, ABC Radio National, which is, none of them have what you call large audiences, were amongst the few news outlets adequately to report the results of the Finkelstein inquiry. For the most part, that there was just reaction, and reaction of a kind that was very short on facts. It really didn't respond to the substance, the substance, or indeed all the sort of caveats of the Finkelstein inquiry's recommendations. It just launched into a furious attack on the findings with headlines like, the death of truth, and, end free speech and so on and so forth. It was just, and of course the Murdoch press was particularly rabid in response. So they headlined all their reports of the findings as a direct threat to freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and the ability, crucially, the ability of the press to carry out their watchdog Fourth Estate functions. So watchdog can muzzle government's critics, state must not be a watchdog, News Media Council could muzzle debate, and so on and so forth. So it was all about, this is such a threat to free speech that we simply can't tolerate it.
But having said that, there have been incidences, haven't there, where the state authorities have actually been quite draconian in their dealings over something what we would regard as quite simple, like a cabinet leak, of taking away notebooks and computers and the rest of it.
Yes.
So in a sense, I can understand that concern, isn't that? It's not unreasonable then, is it?
No, I agree. I think state governments have sometimes made quite heavy-handed use of Official Secrets Acts and so on and so forth, in other words, of statutory powers available to them to try and suppress the publication of information that's clearly in the public interest.